visits and all of that and more. And yet today, the story from yesterday evening following UCF coming back from 16 points down to beat Texas was Rodney Terry trying to tell the coaches or players at UCF, you should not act like you've been here before. Don't be classic. Don't do that blink, because a handful of them were using the horns down hand signal or hand sign after a huge win for UCF. And Rodney Terry, I think, right now trying to deflect maybe where UT is in basketball.
Well, it's totally what he's trying to do, or he's feeling the heat and he's getting mad about things like that. Now, here's the problem with act like you've been there before. I understand that sentiment, and it's a very old school sentiment. But if you're UCF and you've literally never been there before, then why do you begrudge them their emotions? And it's not the worst thing in the world. You should just embrace it, use it as, use it as fuel for the next time or the next game and move on. But it's weird. I don't think this is indicative of the Texas fan base as a whole. I think that it was probably 3-1. Most of them don't really care. But the ones who care a lot. And Rodney Terry is trying to deflect a little bit of they're in a bad way right now, and he's got to try and keep his job. And it doesn't help that Chris Beard's off at Ole Miss and doing well. So all those things are compounding on him. So when he sees the horns down, he overreacts to it.
Yeah, that was incredibly soft, and if I was a Texas fan, I would be embarrassed not by what UCF did, not by UCF beating us, although I'd be a little embarrassed by that too, because that's not what you're expecting at this point, but I'd be most embarrassed by the fact that Rodney Terry tried to go be everybody's dad after that game and act like he was the boss of UCF basketball. He said "we" an awful lot in a post-game press conference about guys who are not his players. We don't do that. We don't act like that. Well, why don't you worry about yourself and let Johnny Dawkins, who knows a thing or two about hoops, worry about his basketball team, the one that just rolled into town and beat you guys. I thought that was so soft. And a lot of the Texas fans, not all of them, but a lot of them that I've seen agree and think that it was a bad look. I don't know how you spin that as anything other than a bad look, because his argument was not very convincing. And it wasn't like, based on what we saw, the guys were doing anything other than the hand sign. I understand how sensitive Texas people can be to that.
Some
Texas fans, but there are fans that will tell you, well, no, nobody cares about the horns down. And then something like this happens, and it's like, oh, really? Well, clearly some people do care about the horns down. Clearly there's a rule in the Big 12 about the horns down for a reason. It's not because Texas fans or people at Texas don't care at all whatsoever. So there is a segment of Texas folks that do, and quite frankly, just get over that. I mean, it just makes you look so soft. It's not that big of a deal. And I get it's disrespectful, whatever, but there's a lot worse hand signs that could be used if people really wanted to be disrespectful. It's just people turning your own sign against you.
Yeah,
like that's all it is. It's like you turning the OU logo upside down. Like, who cares?
All right.
I mean, who cares, honestly?
Yep.
So I just think that Texas itself has made the horns down thing way bigger and way more of an issue than it ever would have been otherwise. Like, if they just never reacted to it, then who would even really care about it? Who would balk? Like, who would even have a reaction to it? You would just be like, yeah, of course, that's what people do when you beat Texas, is you do the horns down. But they've made it like a thing now where it's a running joke when they take such issue with it. And I think that's unfortunate for the fans who really don't care, which is probably the majority. But yeah, Rodney Terry, that was just a bad look all the way around, in my opinion. UCF was pumped up and excited, and congrats to the Knights, because that's getting overshadowed. The fact that they've now beat Kansas and Texas.
Maybe that's part of the plan.
Kansas and Texas in the last week, that is absolutely huge for that basketball program. Welcome to the Big 12. I mean, that's massive. That needs to be said as much as anything else. But yeah, I like Rodney Terry. But I just thought that was such a bad look by him last night, and I'm glad to see that I'm not alone in that, and I think that's where most people's heads are. Not that he's a bad guy by any means,
right,
but that did scream of distract everybody from the loss that we just suffered, and let's talk about how we're classier than you are, which is a total loser move, by the way. What does everybody do when they lose? The class card, right? That's always the card that people try and pull is, oh, well, we're classier than you, and that's exactly what he did. It was a fan play, and that was just a sad reaction, I thought, by Texas basketball coach.
The act like you've been there before, I get that. But at the same time, again, UCF has never been there before, although they had just beaten Kansas a week ago. And so, hey, they're now a team that you better be careful of when you play either home or away. Here are a couple of tweets. Jeff Goodman from the Field of 68 covers the hell out of college basketball. UT was up by 12 at halftime, lost at home, dominated in the second half. The rebounding edge was crazy dominant. Has one win against a top 75 team. They do play at home Saturday morning, 11 o'clock tip against Baylor down at Moody Center, and that is on Saturday morning. And Baylor, they themselves a little bit stung after the ending against Kansas State. Here's one of the quotes from Rodney Terry. About 6 or 7 guys putting the horns down. We don't do that because when you do that, those kinds of things, it looks very classless. All right, so here's my point. Yet he's Rodney Terry. Maybe he didn't realize it. Don't do that shit is what he said. Don't do that as he's walking down and shaking some of the hands. That's classless. That's not your team. Let Johnny Dawkins take care of that if he wants to or not. There was also part of a quote that he said, don't act like you were hoping to win. That, to me, was kind of a jab.
I don't know.
You walked into Austin hoping to win.
I don't know what that means. Like, doesn't make any sense.
So,
everybody walks into a place hoping to win.
Walk in here like the losers that you are and bow down to us and expect to lose against the greater program that is Texas. This might as well have been what he said.
Thanks for the clarification there. But, also, I mean, the thing is, and I get he's in his feelings.
Very much.
But you gotta take a step back and realize, all right, I'm not a student of UCF basketball, so I couldn't tell you their history. But I can tell you that they've probably not had many weeks like this in their history where they beat Kansas, who invented
basketball.
The damn game,
Yep.
and then Texas on the road. That's a huge week for a team that's in a new conference. This is a huge deal. Let them enjoy it and don't worry about them. Worry about you and the fact that you blew a 16-point lead at your house.
Yeah, not just for their basketball. I mean, the school.
Yeah.
This is one of the biggest sports weeks in that school's history, period. No matter the sport, in my opinion at least, and some UCF historian can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, beating Kansas and Texas in basketball in a week span, I don't know how many times they've had bigger weeks.
Everybody else in the Big 12 would like to be able to say that today.
Yeah, and I like that the UCF Twitter account responded with expected to win, and we did, and then posted the highlights attached to that. So they had that comment, which was very fitting and a very nice jab back. But yeah, he handled that all wrong. I like Rodney Terry. I don't know if he's in it for the long haul with Texas. I know there's already plenty of people that are wanting. I saw bring Chris Beard back last night on some tweets, and there's some people that are just not sold on him at this point. I don't know what his future holds, but it's not going to be a very long future if he's going to be that sensitive when they lose at home. I get it to some extent. If UCF guys were crossing the line and acting an ass, then that'd be one thing, but they're throwing the horns down. I get why you'd be sensitive to that, especially given the current state of just the wins and the losses and how the program's sort of going. But I think he handled it the entirely wrong way. Go over to Johnny Dawkins. Let him know. Let him handle his guys. But when he got into the post game, that's really where it was one thing because it was just so awkward. Here they are in the handshake line, and here he is, and he's making it a scene now because he's stopping the players and yelling at them,
cussing.
Yeah. And they're confused as all hell. They're like, "What's going on?" Yeah, you saw the looks on the player. They're like, "What?"
Couple assistant coaches.
Yeah, they're getting reprimanded all of a sudden by the opposing coach. They have no idea what's going on. Then he's, don't do that or whatever. But then when he gets into the post-game press conference and he's like, "We don't do that," and you would think that it was his team that was doing it, but it wasn't. It was the opposing team, and that's what was so bizarre about it is we don't act like that, and we don't have those expectations, and we don't. It's like, who are you talking to? They're not your players. They're not your responsibility. Go have some respect for Johnny Dawkins and let him know your feelings, but don't sit there and air these guys out. I just thought that was so crossing the line. But you know what? Everybody moves on. Well, it's not the end of the world. It was just a bad look, and so we'll see how he handles it.
All it does is possibly stoke other fan bases to do it now even more, or maybe get into it a little bit more. They're probably the only hand signal other than the middle finger that has been able to draw a flag. Which is something that the Big 12 allowed to happen, which still never made sense to me. I was told earlier today, I was talking to he's a huge Texas fan. He's a great guy. We got a little bit into this because I said, what? It appears to me to be very soft in deflection. And I think anyone would admit that's true. But he said, we're the only fan base in America that has our hand signal or our hand sign used against us? Name another one. Paul?
All of them. But yes, I'll say, look, I sat in the Orange Bowl, wide right 3 in 2000, and watched a 6-year-old kid take the tomahawk chop, turn it into a middle finger with the rest of the crowd saying, F you Seminoles, Seminoles F you, with the band. I was not offended. I was actually terrified.
Yeah.
But this kid is going to be carved out of nails or wood later on. But I thought, okay, that's it. And no, Texas is not the only fan base in America that has their hand gesture thrown back in their face.
And even
they're
if
the
they
only
were
fan base in America that wanted to make a rule about it.
I saw it happen multiple times against Miami this year, the upside down U.
Yeah.
Never heard them crying about it, never heard of a TV story about it, never heard the opposing coach in the I never heard Cristobal in the post game after they lost going, I can't believe North Carolina or whoever, it was. But I saw that more than once this past season, and in the years that have passed, I've seen it multiple times. So yeah, there's one example for you right off the top of my head, not knowing you were going to ask that. So yeah, that's BS that they're the only ones. I've seen people do the upside down thumbs up for A&M, even though that's not like a super popular gesture, but I've seen it. And so the OU logo turned upside down on graphics is very easy to go find.
Mocking the Florida chop.
Yeah, mocking the Gators. So yeah, I mean that's not true. That's the only thing, but they're just the most sensitive to it, and so I think some.
Yeah.
But I do think that this is great for UCF to see where some of the annoyance comes from, and Texas and Oklahoma fans. And look, I'm an Oklahoma fan. Will tell you that they should basically be able to, or some feel like and act like that you should not be able to criticize them because they floated the conference for all these years and this and that. But when people say like, God, the Big 12 is going to be so much better when they leave, they're not talking about that there's going to be more wins or that there's going to be more championships, or there's going to be more money
or whatever,
more talent or more NFL picks. That's not what anybody's ever referring to. They're all referring to that dumb stuff like this will or should no longer be the case where there is this issue because somebody threw the hand sign upside down and everybody got upset over it and there's a rule for it and like there's no other rules like that. And so that's where people are 99% of the time coming from when they talk about, God, I can't wait for these guys to be gone. It's that kind of a thing that you saw last night is the reason why people say that. And you know what? It'll be okay in the end. Everything's going to be fine. But, yeah, that was a bad look.
They're not going into a conference where manners is like a thing either. So
that's been the biggest response I've seen today.
saw that.
Yeah.
They're not going into a place.
Even if they go in and win, it doesn't matter.
They're not going into a place where you're not going to walk into Baton Rouge and they're going to be like, oh, eat skinny on, don't you? You guys don't like the Horns down. Come have some crawfish and calm down. Wipe those tears. Like, that's not going to happen. It's going to be so like, you think
it's pouring gasoline on a fire.
Okay, you think if you get hurt by UCF basketball players or Baylor fans or TCU fans throwing the horns down at you, go to Baton Rouge and complain and see how that works out for you.
All right.